Hello and welcome to Thursday Night Talk. This is a show where we discuss the week in Humboldt, or just in general what's going on in Humboldt, the local issues and the local personalities. I'm your local host, Talvi, and I'll be here with you for the next hour. Our topic this week is a big one in a way. It's the Gateway Area Plan, which is a strategic infill redevelopment program, a specific rezoning and reimagining of 138 acres directly west of Arcata's core downtown plaza area, necessitated by Cal Poly Humboldt's planned major expansion of enrollment, as well as the desire to continue receiving funding by complying with California's growth project. What does it mean for Arcata and for the quality of its citizens? Can current services such as fire reach multi-story habitation? What about the accompanying increase in sewer usage, traffic, and parking infrastructure? Where will the money come from to meet these future needs? Is it an unfunded mandate on the part of Cal Poly Humboldt, or is it only Cal Poly that is mandating this expansion? Are there others involved? Joining us tonight are Jennifer Dart, Deputy Director of Community Development for the City of Arcata, Matt Simmons, lawyer and general legal fellow for EPIC, the Environmental Protection Information Center. We've got Colin Fiske, Executive Director, Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities. Welcome to our panelists. How are you doing tonight?
Great, good. Thank you.
Doing well.
Yes, I am glad you are here. We did reach out to representatives from Cal Poly Humboldt. They declined, which does not necessarily mean that they didn't want to be on the show, but either had prior conflicts or, as some of the people I asked who first said yes, decided that there was a conflict of interest because they were either sitting in political positions or on the board, so therefore felt like they couldn't discuss it because of the Brown Act and the whole jumping through hoops in order to follow and comply with that on short notice. So let's start. So who of this board is actually on the board or on the planning committee for the Arcata Gateway Plan?
Are you talking about our planning commission, or?
Yeah. None of you are on the planning commission?
No.
Okay, and that was the major conflict I heard from people who were on the planning commission, is that they can't, it was recommended to them not to because of the Brown Act and following that, which we can have a discussion on the Brown Act, but let's just get into it. So Jennifer, you said you were very well informed on the Gateway Plan. Just a general overview of what it is for everybody.
Yeah, so the way that you framed it, I think, was a little bit different than how I would frame it as far as Cal Poly. This came into being with our housing element update, which was our 6th cycle housing element update. It was an implementation measure in order to rezone areas in the city within the city's current existing boundary that would be then able to develop infill housing or high density infill housing. So that's where it came from. It was actually prior to Cal Poly becoming Cal Poly, or us even knowing that Cal Poly was going to be a thing. It's interesting because when we first started talking about this, we really didn't have that knowledge and didn't know that there was going to be that additional need. I mean, obviously we knew that Arcata was growing, and we'd heard some things about, the wind project, those kind of projects, like those things were sort of in the works. And so clearly we had an arena to meet, which is our regional housing needs assessment. But I think that the need now is actually even more so than when we first started talking about the Gateway Plan. The need for housing is what I'm talking about. That need is definitely grown since the housing element was adopted, which was, I think, in 2019. It might have even been 2018, now that I'm thinking about it.
So everyone comes from a different background. So I just kind of want to do a quick roundtable of just what is your impression of the Gateway Plan? Matt, I know you come from the environmental standpoint in a lot of ways. What is your concept for the plan?
Yeah, so I think the Gateway Plan represents a plan to develop Arcata in a more environmentally friendly way than a lot of cities have developed throughout the state and throughout the country. I mean, a lot of the times when we try to add housing, we end up just building more and more suburbs farther away from this urban core. And that just leads to more driving, more land being developed, which takes away habitat. It kind of ruins an area, right? Because you get that like never ending sprawl that so many other places in California has. And I think that this plan is really a very smart move by the city to sort of preemptively not design that way and to make sure that development is happening in infill places, right, where we've already developed. It's denser so people can, walk or bike to work and to groceries and all the things that they need to do. And it sort of helps us transition from a more car dependent lifestyle by building the built environment in a way that is conducive to walking and biking.
Which leads me to ask Colin, who is part of Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, which one of the biggest dissenting opinions of the Gateway Plan is it's going to increase cars on the road. Where are people going to park? What is your concept for that, Colin?
Yeah, so I would agree with what Matt said, which is that the nature of the type of neighborhood that's envisioned with the Gateway Plan is one where you can get around without a car. And so I think that's really important from an environmental perspective in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and other types of pollution. It's also important from an equity perspective because owning a car is really expensive, and actually in Humboldt County, the cost of transportation is second only to the cost of housing in terms of what household budgets are spent on. And so if we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to get around without a vehicle if they can't afford one, or if they would be better off not having to have one. So I think it's really important that that we look at that from an equity and environmental standpoint. And I guess certainly there are concerns about cars and parking and traffic and all that. I think that's largely because this represents a different model of development than we've seen around here a lot. But there's plenty of research and experience in other places that shows that when we provide the opportunity for people to walk and bike and take the bus and so forth, and sure, when it's maybe a little less convenient to drive and park somewhere, then more people will use those other modes, and sort of ends up being healthier and safer for everybody that way also.
So what we didn't get to what the actual plan is yet, which I wanted, because at first I wasn't quite sure I was grasping it, and from what I gather, it is a maximum of 8 stories. It's been said already that rezoning what is currently an industrial district into a what would you call that zone? Housing or
mixed use
development. There's 2 questions that poses: is where are the businesses going that are already there? Do they own the land there, and are they going to be bought out? And then 2, what does the housing look like, and is it actually, like, it is a plan and not a project that's happening? Nobody's set up to build this yet. This is just kind of a here's the restrictions. And so I'm not sure I would be the best person here to discuss what those restrictions are and what a development is going to hypothetically look at, because none of this is set in stone. This is a plan, not this is happening.
Yeah, I'll take the first, I think, stab at that one. First of all, and I think this is an important thing, our planning commission currently, the work that we're doing on concerns and going through the form-based code, they've really started now with a 7-6-5-4, which is 7 stories, 6 stories, 5, 4, 5, and 4 in each of the different areas. So I just wanted to throw that out because I know a lot of people are stuck on that 8 number, but at this point, we're all kind of working with a 7-story maximum in the Barrel District based on the Planning Commission's feedback that they've given us over the last few meetings. So that's kind of the operating starting point now. I don't know that 7 makes anybody feel any better than 8, but I think it is definitely, a little bit smaller. And I think the neighborhood districts will appreciate that 4 stories as opposed to 5. I think that they really felt like those ones that are kind of butting right up against existing neighborhoods, that 5 just felt like a little too large for them. So I just want to point that out. And then I went off on that sidetrack, and now I'm losing track of what else I was going to tell you.
Well, what would a development look?
Yeah. So we actually are in the process of, with this plan, there will be a form-based code, which is very specific. The nice thing about a form-based code is that it's really detailed on the physical form rather than the separation of uses. So ideally, we don't want to lose all of our businesses in that area. And a lot of the parcel sizes, and I think this is something that's people are really concerned about, but a lot of the parcel sizes that are in that area will not support a large development. And so right off of the bat, if you look at the different parcel sizes, you're going to see that there's many parcels in the Gateway area that are going to stay in their existing uses. They're not going to be immediately changed over into high density housing. That's just a fact based on the size of the parcels and the restrictions for some of them. So I think that's really important to highlight. I think a lot of people do think that as soon as this plan is put in place, there's going to be a huge character change, and that these things are going to start being, popped up all over the place, 7 and 6 and 5-story buildings. And while we definitely want to encourage that housing development and we want that to happen, I don't think we're going to see it happening all at the same time. I don't anticipate that being an immediate response to this plan being adopted. And yeah, just also with that understanding that every single parcel isn't going to be able to support those types of developments that we're looking for in this plan. So I don't anticipate losing the businesses, and we really don't want to. So that's something that's important. There is something on our website that I kind of had a communication with our economic development committee that talks a little bit more about this. And I would definitely encourage anybody who is, still concerned about that to go take a look at that, or to give us a call, because I'm happy to talk about it more in detail.
Which I want to ask, or Colin, were you about to?
Yeah, I was just going to add briefly the point about the economics of building bigger buildings too, which is that, once, and I'm not a developer, but my understanding is that once you get beyond 4 or 5 stories, it gets much more expensive to build these buildings. And so essentially, if we were at a point where it made economic sense to build these taller buildings, the housing market would be so out of control that we would have a lot of other problems at that point. So I think expecting people to come in and immediately build up to the tallest height available is not very realistic.
I would agree with that, Colin.
Yeah, it sounds, but putting the limitations there, I think, is important for public opinion as well as environmental standpoints, which is what I wanted to ask next, and ask Matt, if the development happens or within the plan, what does the environmental aspect look like? Because the marsh is nearby, there is a tributary or watershed near right behind the Creamery District where this would all be being built. Plus, there's the concern about, I heard like there's going to be, shadows cast and people won't be able to power their solar panels. So what does the environmental aspect look like with if a project happened because of this plan?
Yeah, so the city and the state have lots of environmental standards that apply to developments like this. And they'll still have to go through that sort of environmental review that every development has to go through. I'll also say one of the things that we're going to get from these projects potentially are community benefits, where the developer sort of does something nice for the city in exchange for being allowed to build there. And a lot of those community benefits are actually going to have a really positive environmental impact, right? So there could be daylighting of creeks, there could be, mitigation of marshes and
What
wetlands.
does that mean, daylighting of creeks?
Like a lot of our creeks right now are sort of channeled into a pipe basically, or run under the street, and you could have them actually be open and be like real creeks again. And so that like by allowing development, you bring in money and funds that can be used to do these sorts of positive environmental things, right? And so I think one of the nice things about this plan is that it's thought through that ahead of time and sort of listed out a lot of these potential community benefits. And then the Planning Commission is currently going through that list and sort of choosing out their favorites, right? And so that gives a chance for the public to have input on this. And so I actually think that the project is really going to have a net positive environmental impact on our city. I've heard, the specific complaints about shading, and, I sympathize, and I think there are things that you can do with that, like step backs where the building doesn't just go straight up, right? It's pushed back above a certain height, and that reduces the shade on neighboring buildings. So there are people thinking hard about these questions and making sure that we're not doing anything too damaging.
Colin, we had mentioned, well, you're here for transportation priorities, and you're saying that people, when incentivized by removing the option of having, say, parking or the ability to store their vehicle, they'll take bikes and public transportation. So what would have to happen to the transportation in order to meet the needs of, say, I mean, I don't know why the number 3,500 kept being thrown around in all these things, but that was like the growth, like 3,500 units, which I can't see that being feasible even within 20 years. But imagine if there was that, or even, if each place had 2 people, that can be a lot of people. And to assume that they won't have a vehicle, like, will there be other implementations in order, like, what's going to happen to the transportation systems of Arcata and Humboldt County, because Humboldt County would have to respond as well as Arcata's transport?
Yeah, so I think the 3,500 thing, I think, is the idea that if everything were completely built out to the maximum allowable level, which again is not going to happen, but honestly, from a transportation perspective, it would be kind of better if it did, because from the perspective of people using low carbon and healthy transportation, walking and biking and taking the bus, those things are much easier to support when you have more people in a smaller area. And in fact, there's been research that looks at what minimum level of density of sort of people per acre do you need to support a good transit system and to get people to use it. And I'll just say it's denser than we have now. So I guess my answer is it's not it's hard to think about it on a personal perspective from the situation that we have right now, because of course, if you live in a single family home somewhere, and right now the environment is not so conducive to taking the bus or biking or whatever, you might have to rely on a car. But I'm getting some music.
I'm going to give you a moment to formulate the rest of your thought. We're going to be right back. You're listening to KZZH. Welcome back. As we continue our discussion of the Gateway Area Plan, we will also be taking your Zoom calls. You can call us at 669-900-6833. Again, that is 669-900-6833, and you'll need the following meeting ID number to join. It's 511-886-8501. That's 511-886-8501, and the phone number to first call 669-900-6833. I am here with Jennifer Dart, Matt Simmons, and Colin Fiske. Colin, we were talking about what the transportation needs which it probably won't hit the maximum capacity or be developed to hit 3,500 units. But if that happened, and as it happens, because the population is growing, and it seems like it's going to continue to grow no matter how much nobody wants anybody from anywhere else to come here, it's going to keep growing. And so what does the transportation look like for a housing development or such a high-rise complex?
Yeah, okay, so I guess what I will say is that one of the good things about this plan is the location. It's right next to downtown Arcata. It's within walking and biking distance of the university and, pretty much all of the main destinations in town, and also within easy reach of existing public transit that would take you to Eureka and other parts of the county. So just by nature of the location, putting housing in those places makes it easier to get around without a car. And then also, the more people that we put in these existing developed areas, the more demand there is for, say, bus service. And the more people start riding the bus, the more they can provide better service. So it's sort of a positive feedback cycle once you start developing that way. It's not to say that no one is going to bring a car, of course, but just that the need for it will decrease over time. And if we set up, as you mentioned earlier, if we sort of set up the incentives so that we're not encouraging everyone to bring a car, then we'll get better results and have a more sort of people-focused instead of car-focused transportation system.
Matt, I saw that you had raised your hand at one point.
Oh, it was just that you had said, no one wants people to come here, and I get it, and I run into this all the time whenever I talk about this idea of the health of the population increasing. But I think the important thing is to not have it just be an abstract idea of just people or just housing, right? It's, these are our neighbors and our friends who are being priced out of their apartments and their homes and who would like to stay, but there's just such a lack of housing in our community that it's driving people away, right? And we can, put up a barricade and try to keep everything exactly the same, but the only people who will be left in Arcata are the people who already own their homes or who can just pay skyrocketing rents. And so, we've been talking for 20 minutes and we haven't really even talked about the housing crisis and the impact it's having on people's lives. And, new people bring new things and new restaurants and new poetry and all that sort of stuff too. I can get a little bit emotional about it because I was a new person here not that long ago, and you know, I don't want to feel like we're an unwelcoming town, I guess.
That is absolutely fair. It is kind of a joke for me to say that, but it's also, I hear it a lot that people want Humboldt to stay as Humboldt is, but Humboldt's not what it was 5 years ago. It's not what it was 10 years ago. And that brings me to the why even make the Arcata Gateway plan? Why is this necessitated now of all times when it's always been a thought that population can increase? There's always been a housing issue. I mean, we'll say I'm going to shelve the how do you increase home ownership when you're building inexpensive apartments question for later. For now, it is why do we have to have the gateway plan? And I don't know, Jennifer, let's start with you, and I'll just throw that one at you.
No, that's a good one. So why the gateway plan is because we don't have enough zoned property in Arcata that is zoned for residential to develop the amount of housing that we were allocated in our regional housing needs allocation from the state. So basically, we don't have enough residentially zoned land to develop the amount of housing that they assigned to us as our need. And not only that, but we also now know that the need is greater than what it was when we were assigned these numbers. So that's really the kind of the bottom line of it. That's the reason.
What are some of the things that can happen to a city if they don't meet their RENA numbers consistently?
Yeah, we can lose all kinds of funding. That's the first thing. We can lose all kinds of funding, and a lot of the funding that we've been getting, a lot of the grants that we've been getting have been, like our home key grants, for instance, that are assisting homeless, or at risk of being homeless. People are moving into those this weekend, which is extremely dear to my heart because this last week has been absolutely tragic for everybody at City Hall. And so I just don't think people realize kind of what that impact could be. It also is what we use for a lot of our affordable housing projects. And then, for instance, the infill infrastructure grant assisted or is assisting with Shea Park and the Redwood Park. So it also assists, it touches more than just our ability to get grant funding for affordable housing. It also touches on those projects assisted us getting an electric bus, which is going to be coming out, I think, this month. I'm pretty sure we just got the invoice in, so I'm really excited about that. The bike share program, I mean, those kind of things where we get funding, which is incidental to the affordable housing, but actually helps the whole community. So yeah, that's definitely a concern of ours, and we want to make sure that we are meeting our housing element requirements.
So can I go back real quick to what is the home key, and then what happened at City Hall?
Oh, a homeless woman passed away at City Hall on Sunday, and so she was found Monday morning, and it was really hard. We all knew her, and there was a lot of people who had tried to assist her and work with her. And sorry, I'm emotional now because it was a really, really hard time. It was a rough week. And Home Key, so on the bright side, Home Key is 2 projects that we have, which basically will develop 2 former hotels in the Valley West area, Days Inn and Red Roof, to efficiency units for long-term, though, not transitional housing or anything like that, where homeless or people that are at risk of becoming homeless, I guess, or imminently facing homelessness, will be housed. And I think it's about 140 units that are coming in there, and there's just a huge need. And I think Days Inn is actually going to be starting move-in process this weekend. So, which is not called Days Inn, it's now called the Grove, I think, but it's really exciting. I mean, those are two partnerships, one with Arcata House Partnership and one with Danco, that were, as you know, our department specifically, but as a city, I think we're really proud of that. And I think that those two have a potential to have a big impact on our community, and housing those people that really need the housing the most.
Colin, you seem like you're about to say something.
Well, I think that really highlights to me how the reason for the plan, is not just the state's requirements, but there's a moral reason that people need housing. And you asked why now, and I don't know, I don't think we can go back in time and ask why they didn't do it before, but as you mentioned, there has been a need for housing for a long time, and it's only escalating, and housing prices are only going up. So I don't know why it wasn't done before, but I'm glad that we're getting on the way now.
Which, speaking financially, these are not low-income units being planned, but they can be, depending on if a developer comes in and develops low-income housing, that can be it. But would increasing units available stabilize the ever-rising market price for an apartment right now?
So those are really good questions. I think that there's some evidence that is a potential. But I also think that because of some of what we're putting into the plan, we really are encouraging development that is affordable or that has an affordable component. So I think if you look at the housing chapter of the plan, you can see that there's a lot of policies that would incentivize that. And Arcata as a city has historically worked really well with our partners. So Rural Communities, which was formerly Housing Humboldt, and Danco, and Arcata House Partnership. We've really worked with those developers to put in place affordable housing, and we're going to continue to do that in the future. I don't see us, unless the council makes some really dramatic changes, I don't see that that's going to be changing in the future. And so we'll be looking at funding sources that we can partner, that we can collaborate with and get for those type of developments.
So the plan is to increase housing for those who already need it, who are in Humboldt, but also because people are going to be moving here either for Cal Poly or because as far as I'm aware, there are new companies coming in. We have new technology coming in with the tech line running across the ocean, and there's new tech companies coming in, which sounds great, but that increases job opportunities. It also brings in jobs that pay higher, which brings in people who can afford more. So I'm wondering if there are stipulations for what kind of housing, because again, I'm concerned that we want to help people who can't afford housing right now, who don't have homes. But then there's also the concept of we're going to be bringing in people who have a higher spending capacity. And I'm not saying they should pay more for rent or less for rent or anything. I guess it's fair game in a free market, though. Is there a concept of there will be some luxury units?
Absolutely, yes. That's one of the things that we've talked about a lot. We would like there to be, and I think we would encourage and do encourage in this plan, mixed income. I think that's really important. I think a lot of times there's a separation. So that unit is an affordable housing unit. So anybody who goes in there already walks in with the stigma, or comes out of that particular unit, already walks out with the stigma of, oh, I'm in an affordable housing unit. But a mixed income unit, or unit, I'm talking about apartment complex or something similar to that, would be ideal, because then you've got multiple different income levels in that one particular space. And those people are mingling and potentially bringing opportunities to those people who maybe didn't have that opportunity to interact with those people. Do you see what I'm saying? It's really, I think, an important thing is to make sure that there's opportunities. Something else on that line, which I think people don't really understand, is that in our housing element, there's 4 different affordability categories. So we're not looking at just low income, very low income. We're also looking at moderate income and above moderate income. And we have designations and there's a certain number associated with each of those that we need to meet with our RHNA. And we've actually done fairly well with our low and very low numbers historically. Where we're not really meeting is that above moderate. And so I think that, people do want to focus a lot on developing housing for, that is affordable, but there is also, like you said, a need for those above moderate units as well. So I think that is an important thing to highlight.
Matt, you had seemed to be biting your tongue for a moment.
Yeah, so I am a person who believes that building more market rate housing can help at least control rents, maybe even reduce rents. I've seen studies that say both. And the way I like to think about it is, you just talked about sort of a wealthier person moving here. If there's not that luxury unit built, they'll still move here. They'll just pay more for rent in a building that already exists, right? So my landlord, who knows that there are wealthier people moving here, will just increase my rent until either I leave or I pay them more, or that new wealthy person moves in. But if that new luxury unit is built, it gives that person a place to go instead of bidding up my rents, right? And the flip side of that is that when I don't like my landlord and they do something that annoys me, and I go on like Craigslist to look at what other housing there is, if there's no other housing in the city, I don't have any options to leave, right? I can't say to my landlord, like, you know what, that's it, I'm going to go pay someone else money for housing, because there just aren't any options, right? And that also drives up my rent. And so, I think that there's this way of thinking about housing that like breaks everyone's brain, where it's like, oh, that's housing for other people, that's housing for new people, but it's all one like market that we're all living in, and that impacts all of us all the time. Even homeowners, right? Like the demands on rentals can impact the price of homes, right? And so, I one of the reasons, obviously I'm an environmentalist, but I'm also a person who rents in Arcata and wants to see there be more rental options to help sort of combat rents. And I think that anyone who cares about that should be excited about this plan to increase the amount of housing in the city.
Colin, I know you had also opened your mouth to say something earlier.
Well, I think Jen and Matt mostly said it, but I guess I'll just try to like summarize very simply from my perspective, which is that if we want to make housing more affordable, we have to both build more of it and also have various controls on affordability. Because I think people have this idea that if developers will come in and just like build a whole bunch of housing that there's no demand for, and that will cause people to move here. But I mean, some markets work that way, but the housing market does not work that way. And the construction of homes is always lagging the demand. And so because of that, we have to build more housing, but we also have to have some controls for people who can't afford to pay the market rates.
So I know a break is coming up in a moment. After the break, I'd like to continue this discussion concerning home ownership or ownership of one's place permanently, if that's okay with everybody else. So this is Thursday Night Talks. You're listening to KZZH. Welcome back to Thursday Night Talks. I'm here with Jennifer Dirt, Matt Simmons, and Colin Fiske, and we are discussing the Arcata Gateway Plan. What it is, what it means or could mean for Arcata, why it is necessary, and now I'd like to open up the topic of how will it help increase home ownership necessarily, or will it? Will there be condos that people can buy? Is any of the zoning being or plan zoning open for development of, say, apartments a person can buy with a housing management system in place?
Yes, is the answer to that question. And it's actually a policy in our plan. And it's something that we've been talking about a lot. We definitely would like there to be deed restricted owner occupied condo units, or some type of co-op housing. And so that would be something we would encourage. Again, how it really matters if it's going to be developable, and whether or not, a developer can come in and actually make it pencil for those type of developments. It's funny because I'm from here, but I lived in Orange County for several years before moving back. And I owned a condo, which was my first home ownership, experience. And it's very common. And for some reason here, it's not. I don't really understand why. But I know people are like, if you build these, there won't be any ownership opportunities. And I'm all, that's absolutely, it doesn't have to be that way. In other areas, there are, condos that are very much like apartments, but you own it and pay an association fee. And it's a pretty normal thing.
Which I do wonder too, because one of the statements that I was reading, which was somebody opposing, and I can't remember their name. I've read a lot about this now because of the show, but they were saying it's not going to help people. It's not going to help people buy homes, but I think of the people who own so many homes right now, and they are of an older generation, and they don't have the option of downsizing.
Yeah.
In Humboldt County, they can't downsize. Their family doesn't want the house. It's a lot to take care of for a retiree or somebody whose kids leave. So offering a communal housing situation where they can own a condo, still have something in Arcata that their family can come visit. It seems like that would actually open up, or even if they just get an apartment and rent it. It seems like that would open up the housing, but it still doesn't answer the like, what if somebody wants, that house and an acre? Will it? I guess they can't have it in Arcata, is what it seems like. That's just more me rambling because I'm like, I don't know.
There's not a lot of houses with acres
in
Arcata, so there is that.
So. Yeah, you got to go to Southern Humboldt for that level of peace and quiet.
But I do think, oh, sorry.
No. By all means, interrupt me on my ramble.
Well, I was just going to say, I do think it's important for people to remember that most of the land in Arcata, as well as in Eureka and other local communities, is designated solely for single family homes still. And, that's most of the housing that we have. And that's common across the country. But I think people think that because our vision of home ownership is of single family homes, that therefore single family neighborhoods are the way to encourage home ownership. But actually, when you look at the statistics, I don't think that this focus we've had on building single family homes has encouraged home ownership broadly. It has helped to build inequality because only a limited number of people can buy them. And, that's come down along, along racial lines, along class lines, because of historical policies that existed and have been perpetuated today. So I don't think that the status quo of building single family homes really encourages home ownership, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yes, Matt.
So Colin hinted at it, but the whole history of zoning segregation is incredibly racist and classist. After the Supreme Court said that they couldn't just say, you know, white people live here, black people live here, a lot of cities invented their first zoning codes based on, you know, affordability. And they said, okay, this is a single family neighborhood. And that meant you had to be wealthy to live there, which meant you were probably white. The Supreme Court case that upheld that called apartments a nuisance, just like in their very being, like the idea that someone is renting makes them a bad element to society, right? And so I totally support the push for homeownership opportunities, but I think it's important to keep that lens in mind when we're talking about it, right? That, you know, we don't want to be unwelcoming to people just because, you know, they can't afford to purchase a house. And I'll also say, you know, in order to eventually purchase a house, a lot of times you have to rent and work somewhere for a while before you can, you know, make enough money to purchase a home. And without rental opportunities, that doesn't happen and people leave. You know, right now we have all these students who graduate Cal Poly and they leave and go take all their experience somewhere else. It'd be nice if they had somewhere to rent for a while until they got a little older and then maybe purchased a home here. It's just we don't really have enough housing up right now to do that, and so we lose people every year.
Well, it's not just housing, it's job opportunities as well, which, again, I'm not sure who best would be able to answer this. So what job opportunities would open up with a housing situation such as is being proposed by the Gateway Plan?
Well, it's mixed use, I guess. So I'll try and address this, and then I'm sure everybody can piggyback on this. But it is what we're looking at is the ability for there to be mixed use, which I would say would be some of the tech kind of jobs that we're looking at, you know, or potentially other things too, as far as retail and those kind of things, maybe on the bottom floor. And then office spaces for hopefully some of the new jobs that are coming in. And the idea would be that you could live very near to where you work, and that would again make it more pedestrian and bike friendly with the alternative transportation. You know, you don't necessarily have to drive to Eureka to go to your office if your office is on the bottom floor of your apartment complex. That kind of thing would be ideal. That's sort of what we're looking for here in the plan.
I think we have, as we hinted at earlier, there are jobs coming with the university expansion, with offshore wind, with all these things happening. But even just looking right now, the jobs housing balance is off, and particularly it's off in Arcata, where you know there's a much greater concentration of jobs than the equivalent amount of housing. So many people, you know, live in McKinleyville or Eureka or other places and come to work in Arcata. And so, you know, building more housing close to the jobs, as Jen said, is really important from a quality of life perspective, but also from a transportation and greenhouse gas emissions and all those kinds of things.
Which that seems to be where Arcata is going, and Humboldt, well, northern Humboldt County in general, towards this environmental fields and tech fields, which also leads to short-term housing necessities for workers coming in. And how are they being included for not, I mean, we can mention healthcare and traveling nurses, which they seem to be the high ticket item for landlords. If you make a place nice enough, you can rent extremely high rates to traveling nurses, and you get somebody who works all the time, who's never there, and who you know is going to always pay their rent on time, and then leave after 3 months. And is that being built into the scenario for, say, workers who come to help build the wind plant, or workers who come to help build the infrastructure for the mass tech spread that's about to happen or is happening?
So I think that just kind of goes back to the way that the form-based code is it's not really structured around what happens necessarily inside the building. So I don't know that there would be I don't know that I can point to a policy or a program that's specific to workforce housing. But that is something that we're in communication with Open Door specifically about right now. And I know that the hospital has also been kind of mulling around some of those ideas on property that they own. So, Mad River has been talking about that as well, and the need for that. I don't know that it's specifically identified in the gateway, though, if that's, if we're going to focus specifically on the gateway. But yeah, workforce housing is something that we are definitely looking at and in talks with. But most of the properties that I know of that's being identified potentially for are not in the gateway. So,
okay, well, and that goes back to the fact that the gateway is built. It is a plan, not something that even may happen. It is essentially planning for someone to come along and say, I want to build something. And then they're given the parameters of, you can build whatever you want within these parameters here, which, I mean, I'm curious if there's developers being sought or if there's any marketing going towards that. Though we are nearing the end of the show. We've got about 10 more minutes left. So I want to give each of you a few minutes to kind of discuss what's on your mind after everything we've talked about and anything you want people to know. Let's start with you, Jennifer.
Yeah, so what I would like people to know is that we have a whole lot more engagement coming up. The Planning Commission is going to be talking about this again, starting up in the new year, continuing the conversations that we had around community benefits at the first meeting in January. We would love for there to be additional engagement, and there's still a lot of conversations to be had. And we're really excited and looking forward to a really good plan coming out of this. The other thing I wanted to point out too is our form-based code. We have a budget increase request. If that gets through, that'll go December 21st. And if approved, there's going to be a series of additional meetings that go over different aspects of the form-based code that I think will be really, really illuminating for the public, and also give the Planning Commission what they need to have a better understanding and make sure that we come up with a really good form-based code. So that's kind of the next steps. And I just wanted to make sure that anyone who's listening to this had that information.
So what, for those who are just tuning in, explain what the form-based code is.
Yeah, the form-based code is basically the code that will be developed to implement the plan, the gateway plan. So they will go hand in hand. So it'll be the code that you would use to develop something in the gateway area once all is adopted.
And then who decides if the budget increase is approved? Is there going to be a special election, or is this
City Council? So it's just an increase in the scope of work, and the City Council will be meeting and discussing that on the 21st. And it's sorry, it came from the Planning Commission actually requested it. So this is a request from the Planning Commission for additional funds to do this additional work and enhance that form-based code. So it would give quite a bit of funds for additional meetings to happen, some virtual workshops, as well as in-person meetings with the Planning Commission. So those would be special meetings, and graphics, enhanced graphics, which I think will be really useful for the form-based code. So it just basically would give us a better product at the end.
So because two people are on the Planning Commission for the Gateway Plan, that are sitting on City Council, or they're part of it, so they can't vote on this. So
we have 2 open spots, yes, on our Planning Commission.
Okay, so I'm confused how that works with when there's only 3 people then that can vote to pass the budget. But I guess it's up to those 3 whether or not they will. Which I don't know. I feel like there should be a step in between that. But that's not my call. That's just the way the government works in Arcata.
It's a little tricky. That's why it had to get continued. Because we didn't have enough city council members that were able to actually vote on it when it came before the first time. And so it was continued to the 21st.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for being on the show. Matt, if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to tell the public at large.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about the Gateway Plan, and you talked a lot about sort of the misunderstandings and like the rumors. And I think the thing I would emphasize for folks is, not to just believe the most scary sounding thing you've heard about the Gateway Plan. I mean, there were people talking about eminent domain at one point when that's nowhere in the plan. There was, I've heard all sorts of these things, and I think it's a change. It's a real proposed upzoning of a portion of the community, but this isn't some like massive overhaul. It's allowing slightly taller buildings to get built, right? And like building some more bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And so, read the plan, come to a planning commission meeting, I don't know. It's just get educated about it and listen to more shows like this, I guess, so that you can do that.
I agree. Always listen to the show. Colin, anything you'd like to tell everyone? Oh, thank you, Matt Simmons, for being on here. Colin.
Yeah, I guess I'll say, I've said publicly a number of times that I think this is the most bike and pedestrian friendly land use plan that we've seen in the region, maybe ever. And, part of the reason for that, we already discussed the location and the density being so important, but something we didn't discuss is that there are also, concepts to redesign streets in ways that would be kind of revolutionary for our area and would provide for really safe and comfortable access for people walking and biking. And so we also have a transportation safety crisis in the region. And so I think that's a really important element that we didn't really cover before. And that brings me, I guess, to my general feeling about where we're at with this plan right now, which is, it is part of the way that we can address the climate crisis, as well as the housing crisis and this safety crisis I just mentioned. And I call these things crises because I think they're pretty urgent. And so I am hopeful that we can kind of move forward pretty quickly with the plan at this point, and hope that people will follow through and build some stuff.
Well, thank you, Colin, and please feel free to join us if we do a future talk on transportation and transportation safety, which I'm sure we'll get to cover. And that's about the time we have for today. Thank you to Jennifer Dart, Matt Simmons, Colin Fiske. I really appreciate you all being on the show. We'll be back, if not next week, then next year for another Thursday night talk. And if you have topics or suggestions for the show, email us at kzzh@accesshumboldt.net. And reminder, if you missed some of this or only caught the end, the show replays Friday evenings at 8 p.m. on KZZH 96.7, the station you're listening to now. And you can always watch the show on Access Humboldt's YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Talvi Freed, and happy holidays to everybody.